Welcome to Unshakeable Belief, the podcast where we investigate the stories, beliefs, and survival strategies that shape the way we think, feel, lead, and live so we can reconnect with who we were truly created to be. I'm Monica Azoulay, speaker, author, behavior and identity investigator, and the creator of the Reset methodology. If you've ever caught yourself wondering, why do I keep doing this? Why is this so hard to change? Or how did I become this version of myself? You're in the right place because around here, we don't judge behavior, we investigate it because behavior leaves clues. Let's get started. Can I tell you about two invitations? They came from the same conference. The first invitation arrived about 4 weeks before the event. And at the time, I had just finished drafting the reset methodology. I knew there was something important in it. I knew it reflected years of lived experience, studying, coaching, healing, faith, and investigation. But I had not turned it into a keynote. I had not taught it publicly. And I didn't feel prepared to stand on a stage and explain it in a way that felt complete. So I declined the invitation. At the time, that decision sounded completely reasonable. I told myself I needed more time, more clarity, more confidence, a keynote, a more developed framework. I wanted to make sure I could deliver the message well. And none of those desires were wrong. Preparation matters, and stewardship matters, and excellence matters. But a few weeks later, the same event host reached out again. This time, I had 12 days before the conference. And even that was misleading because several of those days were already committed to travel and another event. I knew I wouldn't really have 12 full days to prepare. I knew I would have to return home, draft a brand new keynote, practice it, adjust it, and be ready to present it with only a handful of workable days. From a practical standpoint, saying yes the second time made even less sense than saying yes the first time. But something had shifted inside me. I remember thinking, you know what? I'm done letting fear make this decision for me. What do I have to lose? Why am I letting fear dictate my dreams? Why am I allowing fear to make decisions about something I genuinely believe is part of my God-given purpose? So I said yes. Nothing about the circumstances had improved. I still did not have a finished keynote. The methodology had not magically become more complete, and my calendar had not opened up. I did not suddenly feel fully ready. The circumstances had not changed. The only thing that changed was my willingness to stop letting fear make the decision. When I returned from the other travel and events, I had less than a week to write the keynote. I knew I would need notes, and I hate using notes when I speak. You see, I carried an idea of what a strong speaker was supposed to look like. A strong speaker knows every word. They move through the message without looking down. A strong speaker appears polished, prepared, confident, and completely in command of the room. Using notes felt like evidence that I had not prepared enough. It felt like evidence that I was not ready. But this time, the message mattered more than the image I wanted to maintain. I didn't have the luxury of waiting until I could deliver it according to my preferred standard. I had a choice. I could protect the image of the speaker I believed I needed to be, or I could serve the woman who were going to be in that room. So I used the notes. I delivered the keynote, and the message landed. The women in that room were not keeping score of how many times I looked down, They weren't grading my transitions. They weren't waiting for me to prove that I could memorize a new keynote in a few days. They were listening. They were connecting. They were receiving what I had come to give them. And that experience revealed something to me. Perfectionism had not been protecting the audience from a bad presentation. It had been protecting me from the possibility that someone might think I was not polished enough. The notes were never the real issue. The real issue was what I believed using the notes might say about me. That's how perfectionism works. It attaches a meaning to the mistake, the imperfection, the unfinished piece, the awkward moment, the visible support, or the thing we wish we could hide. Then it convinces us that avoiding that experience is the same thing as being wise. Welcome back to Unshakeable Belief. This month, we are investigating perfectionism. Last week, we began with a foundational truth. Perfectionism is not your identity. It's not who you are. It is a behavior, and behavior leaves clues. Today, we're going to follow those clues. Because if perfectionism is not who you are, then the next question is obvious. What is it protecting? I want to begin with this distinction. Perfectionism is not simply the desire to do excellent work. It's not caring about the quality or wanting to prepare. It's not proofreading the email, practicing the presentation, or making sure the details are correct. Excellence and perfectionism can look similar from the outside. Both may involve preparation, and both may involve high standards. They may involve revision, attention, effort, and care. The difference is not always what you're doing. The difference is what's driving you. Excellence is value-driven. Perfectionism is fear-driven. Excellence says, I want to honor this work. Perfectionism says, I need this work to protect me. Excellence says, I want to serve the people receiving this. Perfectionism says, I need to make sure no one can criticize me. Excellence allows for learning. Perfectionism treats mistakes like exposure. Excellence can finish, but perfectionism keeps moving the finish line. Excellence creates, perfectionism controls. Excellence can receive feedback without collapsing, and perfectionism hears feedback as evidence that something is wrong with the person, not the work. This is why the question is not, do I care about doing this well? The better question is, what do I believe will happen if I don't do it perfectly? This is where the investigation begins. Every protective behavior has a purpose. Control has a purpose. Avoidance has a purpose. People-pleasing has a purpose. Overfunctioning has a purpose. Perfectionism has a purpose. The behavior may be exhausting now. It may be keeping you stuck. It may be delaying your work, draining your energy, affecting your relationships, and keeping you from participating fully in your own life. But it didn't begin because you were weak. It began because some part of you believed it was necessary. At some point, perfectionism worked. Maybe it reduced criticism. It helped you earn praise. It allowed you to anticipate a reaction, made you feel less exposed. It gave you a sense of control in an environment that felt unpredictable. Maybe it helped you belong, gave you a role, the responsible one, the accomplished one, the easy one, the one who never causes trouble, the one who always gets it right, the one everyone can count on. Those identities can become incredibly powerful, not because they reflect the whole truth of who you are, but because they once gave you something you needed: approval, safety, attention, stability, belonging, relief, a sense that you could prevent the next painful thing from happening. This is why shame doesn't heal perfectionism. You can't shame a protective behavior into feeling safe enough to leave. You can't criticize yourself into freedom from self-criticism. And you can't demand that your nervous system stop protecting you while refusing to understand what it believes is at risk. Curiosity has to come first. Instead of asking, why am I like this? Ask, What is this behavior trying to do for me? What does it believe it's preventing? What does it think will happen if it steps aside? Perfectionism is often trying to protect us from criticism. Maybe mistakes were not neutral in your early life. Maybe mistakes were met with anger or embarrassment, or you were mocked. Correction that felt personal. Maybe you got silence. You withdrew. Maybe you had a lecture that lasted far longer than the mistake itself. Maybe you learned to monitor yourself carefully. You learned to double check everything. You learned to anticipate what someone else wanted before they had to ask. You learned that getting it wrong did not simply mean you had made a mistake. It meant you had disappointed someone, created conflict, become a problem. When that happens repeatedly, the nervous system doesn't file mistakes under normal human learning. It files them under danger. So you become careful, then more careful, then so careful that ordinary choices begin carrying extraordinary pressure. The email can't simply be an email. It becomes a test of whether you sound intelligent enough. The conversation can't simply be honest. It becomes a test of whether you can explain yourself well enough to avoid being misunderstood. The project can't simply be the first version. It becomes a public verdict on whether you're qualified. The dinner can't simply be dinner. The home can't simply be lived in. The event can't simply be enjoyed. Everything feels like evidence. And when everything feels like evidence, perfectionism becomes the attempt to control the verdict. Perfectionism may also be protecting you from rejection. This can sound like if I'm good enough, useful enough, attractive enough, successful enough, calm enough, accommodating enough, or impressive enough, people will choose me. Maybe they'll stay. Maybe they'll approve of me. Maybe I won't be left. Maybe I will finally be enough. The heartbreaking part is that the person may not consciously believe any of that. They simply think that they have high standards. They may believe she's being responsible. But underneath the achievement is often a question that has nothing to do with achievement. What will I still be loved if I'm ordinary here? Will I still belong if I need help? Will I still be accepted if I disappoint you? Will I still matter if I'm not useful? These are not productivity questions. These are attachment questions, belonging questions, questions about your worth. Perfectionism may also be protecting you from being seen. This is one of the most important connections because perfectionism doesn't always create more action. Sometimes it creates hiding. It can look like procrastination, endless research, repeated editing, waiting for the right time, more confidence, waiting until your body changes, until the house looks better, until the finances approve, until the message is clearer, until you've healed more, until you're finally ready. Perfectionism says the delay is about quality, but sometimes the delay is about visibility. Because if you never release the work, no one can reject it. If you never apply, no one can say no. If you never share the story, no one can misunderstand it. If you never step into the photograph, no one can judge how you look. If you never say what you need, no one can tell you that your needs are inconvenient. If you never allow yourself to be fully seen, no one can confirm the fear that being fully seen might cost you belonging. The deepest fear is not always producing imperfect work. Sometimes the deeper fear is being seen while imperfect. That distinction matters because you can spend years improving the work while never addressing the fear of exposure. You can become more skilled, more educated, more prepared, more accomplished, while still believing you must hide any part of yourself that feels unfinished. I've seen this in my own relationship with visibility. There have been times when I believed I needed to look different before I deserved to participate, before I could wear the outfit, before I could be in the pictures, before I could go to the pool, before I could allow myself to be seen without mentally tracking every perceived flaw. That's not really about appearance, it's about safety. It's the belief that visibility becomes acceptable only after perfection has been achieved. But that's the lie. Perfection is never achieved. The body changes, life changes, age changes us, illness changes us, grief changes us, stress, healing. If participation requires flawlessness, we will spend our lives waiting outside of our own experiences. One of the most healing things I've practiced is allowing myself to participate before everything feels resolved. To wear the shorts, to get into the swimsuit, to be in the photograph, to enter the room, to live while the story is still unfolding. The goal is not to love every part of yourself every day. The goal is to stop requiring perfection as the price of participation. Perfectionism may also be protecting you from blame. If you grew up or lived in environments where problems quickly became questions of whose fault it was, you may have learned to stay above reproach. You anticipate, over-prepare, keep detailed records, explain everything, replay conversations. You try to make your intention impossible to misread. You take responsibility for things that were never entirely yours because carrying the responsibility feels safer than being accused of avoiding it. If you believe that if you can do everything correctly, no one will be able to point out when something goes wrong. You believe that if you can do everything correctly, no one will be able to point at you when something goes wrong. But life doesn't work that way. You can make thoughtful decisions and still experience disappointing outcomes. You can communicate clearly and still be misunderstood. You can show up faithfully and still have someone decide you should have done more. You can love deeply and still be blamed. You can tell the truth and still have someone prefer another version. Perfection can't control interpretation. That was one of the biggest lessons I learned in speaking truth about my own life. For a long time, I believed I needed to explain my experiences so completely and so carefully that no reasonable person could misunderstand me. I wanted every detail in the correct order. I wanted the context to be undeniable. I wanted the truth to be so perfectly expressed it could not be rejected. But even a perfectly explained truth can't control another person's interpretation. Healing didn't happen when everyone finally agreed with me. It happened when my peace stopped depending on whether they did. That is freedom from perfectionism. Not because the truth no longer matters, not because communication no longer matters, but because I no longer require a flawless presentation of my story to validate the story itself. Perfectionism may be protecting you from uncertainty. It's where perfectionism and control often work together. Control tries to manage the external environment, and perfectionism tries to manage the self. People-pleasing tries to manage other people's emotions or perceptions. Different behaviors, similar purpose. Create safety, reduce uncertainty, prevent pain. If I plan enough, maybe nothing will surprise me. If I prepare enough, maybe nothing will go wrong. If I make the right decision, maybe I will never regret it. This belief often develops in people who had to become highly responsible. People who learned that if they didn't anticipate the problem, no one else would. People who carried emotional, financial, practical, or relational stability. People who learned that other people's lack of follow through could create real consequences. In those circumstances, preparation isn't imaginary. It may have been necessary. Competence may have protected you. Overfunctioning may have kept the family moving. Hypervigilance may have helped you notice what others missed. The work is not to pretend that those skills were useless. The work is to notice when a once useful skill becomes a permanent demand. When preparation becomes the belief that you must predict everything. when responsibility becomes the belief that you must carry everything, when excellence becomes the belief that you must never fail, when self-reliance becomes the belief that receiving help is unsafe, when discernment becomes the belief that you can't move until every certainty has disappeared. Safety doesn't come from preventing every possible mistake. Safety comes from trusting your ability to respond when life does not go according to plan. That is a completely different kind of confidence. Perfectionism says, I will be safe when nothing goes wrong. Self-trust says, I can remain grounded even when something does. Perfectionism says, I need certainty before I move. Faith says, I can take the next step without controlling the entire path. Perfectionism says, I must know how this ends. And purpose says, I'm responsible for the next faithful action. That brings me back to the two invitations. When I declined the first invitation, I believed I was protecting the quality of the message. But underneath that was a fear that the message would not be strong enough, that I wouldn't explain the methodology well enough, that I would stand in front of a room before I had earned the right to teach what I had developed. When the second invitation arrived, the practical obstacles were greater, but something inside me recognized that fear had been allowed to sound like wisdom. I want to be careful here. Not every no is fear. Not every delay is perfectionism. Not every need for preparation is avoidance. Discernment matters. Capacity matters. Timing matters. Your health matters. Resources matter. There are wise reasons to wait. There are aligned reasons to decline. The goal is not to say yes to everything. The goal is to become honest about what is making the decision. Is this a capacity-based no or a fear-based no? Am I protecting my health or am I protecting my image? Am I waiting because the work genuinely requires more development? Or am I waiting because development has become a socially acceptable hiding place? Am I honoring the timing? Or am I hoping for a future moment when I will no longer feel vulnerable? That level of honesty requires curiosity. It requires the still point, the place where we stop reacting long enough to hear what is actually true. Fear can be loud. Urgency can be loud. Shame can be loud. The still point is quieter. It doesn't promise that you will feel completely ready. It helps you identify the next aligned decision. When I said yes to the event, I did not suddenly stop being afraid. I stopped treating fear as the final authority. That's an important distinction. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that fear will not be allowed to dictate the future. And faith is not flawless confidence. Faith is returning to trust while uncertainty is still present. Perfectionism can enter our faith in ways we don't always recognize. We may believe that if we truly trusted God, we would never worry. If we were spiritually mature enough, we would never question. If we surrendered completely, we would never feel the urge to control. Then surrender itself becomes another performance. We start grading our faith. We criticize ourselves for being human. We turn every anxious thought into evidence that we are failing spiritually. But God does not require flawless surrender. He meets us each time we return. Faith is not pretending the protective response never appears. Faith is noticing it and choosing where we will place our trust next. It's saying, I'm afraid, and I will still take the next faithful step. I don't know how this will unfold, and I will steward what is in front of me. I can't control how people receive this, but I will still tell the truth. I can't guarantee the outcome, but I will still honor the assignment. That is what I learned at the event in Odessa. My responsibility was not to guarantee a perfect keynote. My responsibility was to faithfully steward the message. Perfectionism kept asking, how will this reflect on me? Purpose kept asking, how will this serve them? That question can interrupt the protective cycle. How will this reflect on me? What if I make a mistake? What if I'm judged? What if I'm not ready? What if they see the gap? Those questions turn the entire moment into an identity test. But purpose asks something else. What is mine to give here? What truth am I being asked to speak? What does this person need from me? What is the next faithful action? How can I serve without demanding that I perform flawlessly? Purpose moves the focus from image management to stewardship. It does not eliminate preparation. It purifies the reason for preparation. That is why excellence can remain. We're not trying to become careless. We're not trying to lower the standards, and we're not using healing as an excuse to avoid growth. We're removing the impossible job we gave excellence. Excellence was never meant to prove our worth. It was never meant to make rejection impossible. It was never meant to control every outcome. It was never meant to protect us from being human. The goal is not to care less. The goal is to stop asking quality to create safety. So how do we begin changing this? We investigate. The next time you notice the perfectionistic response, don't immediately force yourself to stop. Pause. Name what is happening. You might say, I notice I'm editing this repeatedly because I'm afraid people will judge me. I notice I want to delay submitting this because I can't guarantee the outcome. Or I notice I'm over preparing because preparation makes me feel protected from criticism. Naming the pattern is not self-criticism. It's awareness. It takes an automatic strategy and brings it into conscious choice. Then we ask the first question. What am I afraid will happen if this is not perfect? Don't rush past the answer. Maybe you're afraid someone will think you're unqualified, or you'll disappoint someone. Maybe you're afraid you will be blamed, or that the result will prove an old story about you. Maybe you're afraid you'll lose belonging, or that you'll be visible and rejected. Then ask the second question. What emotional pain am I trying to prevent? This moves you beneath the task. The task may be the presentation. The pain may be humiliation. The task may be the email. The pain may be conflict. The task may be the photograph. The pain may be shame. The task may be the business launch. The pain may be being seen trying and not succeeding immediately. Then ask the third question. Is this a present requirement or an old survival rule? That question is powerful because the protective response often belongs to an earlier environment. Maybe being imperfect once did carry emotional consequences. Maybe needing help once was used against you. Maybe being different once threatened your belonging. And maybe a mistake once created instability. Honor that truth, but then look around. What's true now? Do you have more agency now? More skill, more support, more discernment, more capacity to respond, more permission to leave situations that require self-abandonment? The nervous system learns through experience. It will not always be convinced by a statement. It needs evidence. That's why imperfect action matters. Every time you act before totally certain and you remain safe, you've created evidence. Every time you allow the first version to exist, you create evidence. Every time you speak honestly without over-explaining, you create evidence. Every time you use the notes and still to deliver the message, you create evidence. Every time you're visible without first becoming flawless, you create evidence. The goal is not one dramatic act of rebellion against perfectionism. It's repeated safe experiences that teach your system a new truth. I can be imperfect and still be respected. I can be visible and still be safe. I can make a mistake and still be capable. I can disappoint someone and still remain grounded in who I am. I can tell the truth without controlling whether everyone agrees. I can steward the work without controlling its reception. This is how self-trust grows. Not because you guarantee that you will always get it right, but because you learn that you can respond when you don't. I want to offer you a simple practice this week. Choose one place where perfectionism has been creating delay, pressure, or hiding. Don't choose the most overwhelming thing in your life. Choose something specific: an email, a post, a conversation, a decision, a photograph, a submission. Then write down these 4 questions. What am I afraid will happen if this is not perfect? What emotional pain am I trying to prevent? Is this danger present now, or is this an old survival rule? What would one aligned imperfection action look like? Then take the action. Send the email, ask the question, use the notes, wear the outfit, apply before every doubt disappears. Let the action be small enough that your nervous system can remain present. We're not trying to overwhelm the protective system. We're trying to teach it. We're showing it that the old rule is no longer the only option. When the discomfort appears, and it will, do not interpret discomfort as evidence that the decision was wrong. Some discomfort is simply the feeling of no longer obeying an old rule. You can feel exposed and still be safe. You can feel uncertain and still be aligned. You can feel afraid and still be faithful. You can feel imperfect and still be enough. I wish I could tell you that after the Odessa keynote, perfectionism disappeared. It did not. Protective behaviors don't usually leave because of one breakthrough. They just become easier to recognize. They lose some of their authority. We gather new evidence, we make a different choice, and then we practice again. The next time fear disguises itself as wisdom, I can pause. I can ask what it is protecting. I can honor the reason it appeared, and I can decide whether it should be allowed to lead. That's the work. Not defeating yourself, not declaring war on the part of you that tried to survive, understanding it, thanking it, updating it, reconnecting with the part of you that can choose from truth instead of fear. Perfectionism may have protected you from criticism, rejection, blame, uncertainty, visibility, shame. It may have helped you survive a season when being careful made sense. But it does not get to define your identity. It does not get to decide your dreams. It does not get to determine whether you answer the invitation. It does not get to turn your God-given purpose into an endless preparation project. You're allowed to prepare. You're allowed to care deeply. You're allowed to pursue excellence. You're also allowed to begin before you feel finished. You're allowed to use the notes. You're allowed to learn in public. You're allowed to be seen becoming. You're allowed to take the next faithful step without knowing exactly how the story ends. You see, I believed I needed more preparation before I could say yes. And 12 days before the event, with even less workable time, I realized something important. I did not need perfect conditions. I needed to stop allowing fear to dictate my purpose. Maybe that's the invitation for you today. Not to force yourself into something that is not aligned, not to say yes when your health, your capacity, or your discernment says no, but to become honest about the voice making the decision. Is it wisdom? Or is it fear wearing wisdom's clothes? Is it stewardship or is it self-protection? Is the work truly not ready? Or are you afraid of being seen while it's still becoming? Only you can answer that, but you have to be willing to ask. Next week, we're going to continue this investigation because once we understand what perfectionism has been protecting, we have to look honestly at what that protection has been costing us. The delayed dreams, the lost rest, the pressure, the self-doubt, the relationships affected by impossible standards, the creativity that never gets released, the life we postpone while waiting to become flawless. That's where we are going next. For now, remember this. Perfectionism is not trying to ruin your life. It's trying to protect you with an old strategy. You don't have to shame it. You don't have to obey it either. You can pause, you can investigate, and you can choose the next aligned action. You can trust that your worth will survive imperfection. You can trust that God is not waiting for a flawless version of you before he can use your life. You can answer the invitation before fear has approved the terms. Sometimes the most loving thing we can remind each other is that readiness is not always a feeling that arrives before the step. Sometimes readiness is built because we took it. If today's episode resonated with you, I want to invite you to take the next step. Understanding your patterns is powerful, but lasting transformation happens when you begin putting that understanding into practice. That's exactly why I created Return to Herself. Beginning October 5th, this live 4-week coaching experience is designed to help you move beyond simply recognizing your survival strategies and begin reconnecting with the woman you've always been beneath the pressure, perfectionism, and expectations. If you're ready to stop surviving and start living with greater clarity, confidence, and intention, I'd love to have you join us. You'll find all the details and registration information in the show notes. And if this episode encouraged you, challenged you, or made you see yourself in a new way, would you take just a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it? You never know how one conversation can change someone's life. Until next time, remember, behavior leaves clues, curiosity replaces shame, truth creates freedom, and you were made for more.